to ask everyone to try and come as close as possible for the comfort of the discussion and the speakers. Please feel free, because it's a hard work to speak. So it is Cornelia, if you want to come closer also. Cornelia? I don't think she has. No.
Go to the start.
Yeah. I want, as a European, to really apologize for this very interesting setup. VC, I think it would have been better to just sit under a tree and talk in that way.
Yes.
This is just, very difficult. If you can, Sarah and Maureen, also feel free to come even closer. The good thing is that now we have this experience from the previous session, that once you get your attention together and you are focused in on each other and zoomed in on each other, you start to filter out all the noise, and you're actually able to be within this group in a conversation. It is even for myself, it's a strange experience, but I felt it happening in the previous session, and that was a very good feeling, good experience. There just are no microphones. So it has been set up in this way. We are supposed to apparently talk. Salah, can I invite you also to come closer? Just you know how hard it is to talk from here. Helen also. Jamal, please also come closer. There's still 3 chairs here. Because it's really very difficult. There's a lot of noise outside and there is no acoustic. So you are talking to a brick wall. So this session has been organized by the Trust Fund for Victims of the ICC. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Peter de Baan. He is moderating this session. Again, I'm apologizing for the difficult circumstance for it, but I know that this is a very important session. It's raising very critical issues as we are speaking here at this European Forum on all the benefits of technology. But in this room, we are speaking to some of the difficulties that we can be experiencing, and we're actually experiencing them as we speak and listen. Peter de Baan, he is the director of the Trust Fund for Victims of the ICC. And again, I'm handing over to Peter to moderate this session. I hope everybody will enjoy. Thank you. Give him a hand.
Thank you, Miriam, for setting up a tree, really, which you did. Gives me the opportunity to thank you for working with us, to have us here, to bring the International Court to the EDDs. First time. I think that's worthy of an applause. And with the ICC, also the Trust Fund for Victims. Today's session, I'm the moderator, by the way, so I have 2 jobs. My first job is to shut up and not talk too much, and let other people talk, and I'll be doing that shortly. My other job is to set the stage for the speakers to come forward and present their stories. And really, this is a brainstorming session, so everybody in this audience is invited to participate in the brainstorm. Let your brains storm, please. We have a big tree, it can handle the storm. Black holes in the internet. We're living in our own black hole right there under the tree. A lot of noise around, a noisy black hole. We're managing, I think. Thinking about this session, a saying came to my mind, which is see no evil, hear no evil. Everybody knows that saying, right? And it's true, but it's not complete. See no evil, hear no evil, have no justice. That is what we're talking about. See no evil, hear no evil, have no justice, have no accountability for the crimes, have no reparations for the harm suffered by victims. That is the problem that we're talking about. If we don't see, if we don't hear what's happening, how can we hope for justice? How can we have victims hope for justice and accountability? How can the international community, which we are in right now, be made accountable for also ensuring that justice is a possibility at least? So we have a number of speakers here to talk about that. Everybody hears, if you look at the Ukraine war right now, the digital footprint of that war is enormous. And we know all about Mariupol, we know all about Bucha. There's so much evil that we can see and hear about, to the extent that a lot of similar stories are being blocked out. Talk about Libya, talk about Sudan, Central African Republic. And even more so, the black holes that we find there. There's no information, often, or it's very difficult. Victims are sometimes deliberately shielded, moved away from being connected to each other and to their communities and to the international community. That is how to understand and appreciate that problem, how to negotiate that problem. That is the brainstorm of today. There'll be two speakers to begin with, both from the International Criminal Court and the ICC. Ms. Cristina Ribeiro, who is the investigations coordinator and the prosecutor at the Office of the Prosecutor, at the Office of the Prosecutor of the ICC. Really happy to have you here with us. We have Francisca Eckelmans, who is the legal advisor at the Trust Fund for Victims, connecting justice to reparations. That is the job that we do. Thank you for being with us. We should have Sarah on the screen. We have Morgan in the audience. We have Clara in the audience. And we have Natalia on the screen as well, I believe. Those are going to be a couple of speakers to begin with. And I really, really hope it's my job to push you there to have an interactive conversation. Ask questions, put problems, find solutions. Maybe, not all of them, but at least have the issue on the table. So with that, can I invite Christina to have the first word? Thank you.
I hope you can listen to me. I will try to speak as loudly as I can. Black holes on the internet, and I'm trying to connect that with the work we do. So I'll talk a little bit about how has the Office of the Prosecutor been using and perceiving the advances of technology in the work we do, and a little bit about what Peter was saying about how there are also some communities that are in the way left out. How does technology and the internet and the exposure we have today helps us and sometimes doesn't help us? So the ICC started, for, I don't know how many of you know a lot about our work, but we started to work in 2002, 4, and actually the first case I worked in was in Uganda. And I had interviewed actually many of the women and children who were with the LRA for many years. So I was actually relating with the stories of many of you just now in the previous panel. And by then, and those who know the situation, the most advanced technology the LRA had was radio communications, right? So that was it. There was no internet. There was nothing. The way people will hear about it was through the stories of the community and through the work that many NGOs would do by going there and actually voicing the stories of those communities. We had also investigations at that time in the DRC, in Ituri, and we heard also about Lubanga and Katanga, those cases that are now in reparation stage. And at that time, we were going to Ituri, we were going to those places also to hear stories. There was also no internet, there was not much phone technology, nothing. There was no even documentary evidence. It was still stories that were being told by the witnesses to the investigators under a tree. It was not a tree, but it could be a tree as well. So the world changed a lot after that. And today our investigations are very much on the internet, actually. When you think about cases that we have at the moment, such as the Myanmar-Bangladesh crisis with the community of the Rohingya population that was displaced from one country to the other. We know, and it's public, I'm not giving you any confidential information, that a lot of the incitement to violence, a lot of the racist propaganda that was putting on was happening on Facebook platforms. That means not only the crimes were being committed through technology, but now our evidence is precisely on those platforms to be able to bring accountability. When you think about what is happening now in Ukraine and everybody's filming and there is footage and there is internet and there is everybody has a social platform where you are video or recording or doing something that you are making available to the world, it changed dramatically. There's also, I mean, we will be talking about Libya, where you do see communities there as well, with some access to internet and some access to technology, but with a different scenario where that is much more challenging for them to be able to use that to advocate for their stories. But we will also hear about how that same technology is used by perpetrators to basically ransom them, but also to persecute certain communities. Because if I get her phone, but if I get your phone, I will know who your enemy, who your friends are. So if I perceive you as part of a community that I am persecuting, that means your friends are probably also part of that community. And if I take your phone, I can easily target them to come to me, and I can just. So technology can also be used to commit crimes. And again, it leaves that footprint that us as investigators want to capture. So the office made a huge effort to move from that reality where there was not much technology to now having to be able to surf the internet, be able to capture all that evidence, be able to pick up devices. And if you think about how many devices we have that have information on it, now that even fridges have information on it. That tells about who you are talking to and who you are speaking. So it's about being able to capture all that information, process it, and make sense out of it to actually prove accountability. So this is a little bit for you to say where the intersection between the internet and technology with our work is at the moment. I guess what we wanted to highlight today is how that same technology can be used to good and evil. It can be used for us to be able to advocate, and many NGOs and citizen reporting is being able through internet, to Instagram, to all the same platforms, to be able to bring to light atrocities that are being committed, is also being used to commit crimes, and it's being used to investigate those crimes. So it's all these layers in one thing. Technology, I've had the privilege of being able to actually interact with a lot of the tech companies that are seeing that platforms being used for all of that, and they are quite aware of this situation, and they are trying to organize themselves to preserve some of this content, to be able to create mechanisms to shut down platforms and shut down the content when it's becoming abusive, for example. And it's a huge work for all the community. We and other accountability mechanisms are really struggling, for example, in navigating big data, sometimes in how many different languages that we have to process it. So, but we are also looking into communities where there is still not the case, meaning I can tell you a little story where we have been doing some Facebook approaches, which is a quite interesting investigative tool where you can actually make sure that certain communities see a certain content at a certain time by advertising. You probably will see it for normal advertising, but it can be used to advertise, for example, a link to participate in our investigations. And if we have a community with a strong internet penetration, we can actually do that. In some other areas, you have nothing. You still have to go with a paper and ask people to bring the paper around so that people can know about how to interact with the ICC and how to bring their stories to the knowledge of our investigators. So we are still navigating all these realities. Very recently, we had an interesting experience in the Central African Republic, where we tried to open an internet gateway that was for people to be able to reach us in The Hague from Bangui through the internet. And it was a kind of a controversial experience that we wanted to put on, because some colleagues were a bit worried that it would be used as an abusive tool, that people would just put massive content that was not used. And so we thought about Bangui as being a good one, because we knew there was some internet, but not much. So there would also not be a massive use of it. But in the end, we got nothing. There's not one single, or there was a couple, but nothing significant. So we could see that the community was just not tuned into that. So we moved on, and actually we did a very successful outreach campaign, just using SMS. As simple as that. A normal phone, which everybody in the countries have, and we did that outreach. So we also have to be a little bit creative sometimes and try to find ways of I still feel that technology can be very useful, but still the local communities and going and speak to the people who can spread the word is still where to go. What else can I say to just kickstart our brainstorming? I think you were saying we have this moment here where we are all in this big event, and we have access to internet, free Wi-Fi, and all of that. But the reality is that there are most of the places where crimes are being committed, but there are victims that need support, that need justice, that need a bit of support, social assistance, trauma, psychological support. They have nothing of that, right? Meaning they are on their own, they are isolated, they are forgotten. And the idea is to how can we bring a little bit more to them, and how can we support in bringing to light the stories of these people and help them to do that. We do see some support, and I know, for example, and I feel very encouraged when I know the UN realized how important it was to make sure that every refugee camp had Wi-Fi. And they are now proactively making sure that in every camp there's Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi, because everybody brings a phone. You might leave everything behind, but you bring your phone. And that's a way that you can still somehow connect with your communities. And you might be away from your husband or your children, but you can still WhatsApp if you have an internet connection. And that is new. For us, it's new as well. In the past, we would have a phone number or an address. But people would move and we would lose completely track of where they are. But now we ask them, no, I don't, yeah, your phone is good, but we want your Gmail. We want your WhatsApp number, because then we move, but we always can reach them. And you are somehow also more connected. So there's a lot of good that can come out of it as well. And so I think what we want is the ability that everybody has access to it, and so try to diminish the black holes and bring things to light and help people to connect the best we can.
Thank you so much, Christina, because this is a good story also to hear that even the most sophisticated international organizations need to learn the language of the black holes and need to adapt to find their way to navigate the black holes and at least have an idea of what's happening out there and come up with solutions which may not have been in the, a silent gateway in a black hole doesn't give you lots, doesn't it? Going through SMS, find ways also to make connections through free Wi-Fi, maybe through the United Nations system. Those are ways that we can employ to find solutions to facilitate our work and to have access to justice for victims. I would like to invite my colleague, Francisca. Before you speak, Francisca, let me just briefly introduce you, if I may. Francisca has worked at the ICC, actually, before coming to the Trust Fund for a long time, from the beginning, has been in the appeals chambers, then went to Cambodia with the ICCC, came back, then went to the Kosovo Tribunal. And then what? So if you've seen everything and done everything, where do you go? Go to the Trust Fund for Victims. Just saying, right? Francisca, you have the word.
Thank you very much. So I will bring in the perspective of the Trust Fund for Victims. Try to speak loud so that you can hear me also in the back. I hope that works. So I think as Christina just really very clearly brought over, we all are very much used to our internet connectivity nowadays. That's what we know. And we as a trust fund, here in the Hague especially, we are also used to that. We have a board of directors that is everywhere in the world, and we connect with them remotely. Every month we have meetings remotely. So they are much more involved than they were many years ago because of this internet connectivity. When we had COVID, we were all connected in our homes, so not in the office, but in our homes in The Hague and in the field with our people on the ground. We are about 25 people, and the meetings were on equal footing, you know, no hybrid meetings. Everyone was remotely connected. And we had to find ways of connecting to the victims to continue our work. My colleague Sheikh, you have heard him before already speaking in another session. We had to find ways of holding interviews with victims to determine whether they are victims of the first case of the ICC, of the Lubanga case. Are they really child soldiers? So we put in place hybrid meetings, partly in Bunia with our people on the ground, partly in The Hague or in Canada with the legal representatives, talking to the victims remotely at the same time, having a translator on the ground. And it worked. We were able to hold these interviews. So we found very inventive ways of dealing with a difficult situation. But then when we look at the reality of Ituri, where we have 3 cases of reparations that the Trust Fund is implementing, after the court found 3 people guilty of crimes committed there, we are facing a very different situation. As Christina also just described, there is actually a black hole because there is no internet connectivity. There are very few people with a phone, or the people who have phones, they need to pay for electricity, so it's hard to charge. It's hard to be able to be connected. And we are facing that because the 2,500 child soldiers that we found to be eligible for reparations, we cannot reach all of them. Our partner on the ground providing reparations is struggling, even with intermediaries, because the conflict is ongoing. People are on the move. They're hard to be reached, basically. And that's a reality we will still be facing for the future in the cases we are having in Ituri. It's the Lubanga case and the Ntaganda case that we need to approach in that difficult situation of lack of connectivity. So that is basically the situation also in the Central African Republic, where we will get quite a number of additional cases very soon. And that is not so surprising in a way, because we all come from that situation. Internet is still new, and in these countries, it's therefore very, very important that there is development. We just had an Agora session where there was a call for that, where it was said, the youth in Africa, they want to connect. They want to be able to find ways of doing that. So we are very supportive of any such developments, because it will help the Trust Fund in the end to bring reparations to the people for, to the victims of the crimes for which the ICC made a conviction in that sense, and also other victims. So it's very essential. But then on the other hand, I think there is the specific trauma of victims in a situation where they are losing that connectivity, where they are losing that internet and phone connectivity, and where they are not able anymore to talk to their families. They are not able to connect. It's a specific trauma that I have seen very much in Cambodia as well, where we dealt with crimes committed 30 years ago, where the entire population of the cities was moved to the countryside. They were not anymore able to connect with anyone. They came from a very privileged position at the time to be, part of the entire world. And from one day to the other, they had to leave everything behind and move into the countryside. That's the Khmer Rouge situation. And I remember the judges I worked with, they were youth at the time, and they told me how unbelievable it is that today, An entire year feels like a few days, and at that time, every single day felt like a year. Because they were in that situation of complete isolation. And I believe very strongly that now in the situation of Libya, in the situation of the Yazidi, in the situation where people are taken, the phone is taken away and you are basically shut off and abused and subject to crime, that this specific trauma needs to then be specifically addressed. And we will certainly work on that once we get into a situation like that. It's, that's the message here, and I stop here for the discussion to understand black holes. Yes, they are there, and they can be created. And there's two very specific different situations, but there are ways to address at least the one, the DRC and in Africa more generally. And the other one, it's committing a crime, basically. That's where I stand here.
Thank you so much, Francisca, for a very compelling intervention, really. And I think it brings to all of us an understanding also about how justice may work. We'll come to that later, but let me just give you a very short, how do you say that, analogy. If the OTP goes in to investigate crimes, they go into a very, very messy situation. If I can put it like that. It's total chaos, total mess. Crimes have been committed, are being committed. Very difficult to navigate that situation with the black holes, even if the black holes are not there. Then the OTP translates that into investigation and prosecutions, brings it to what I could call the clinical environment of the court in The Hague. It gets treated. You have a prosecution, you have a trial, you have a judgment, we're lucky, conviction. You have reparations proceedings. Then it gets handed over to the trust fund, who brings all of this back to the very messy situation in which victims still find themselves, including black holes and everything. I think OTP, Office of the Prosecutor, Trust Fund Victims, we are the front offices of the Rome Statute system with our foot in the clay, trying to sort out the mess in such a way that there will be justice, there will be accountability, there will be recognition of harm, there will be reparations. However, there are still situations that we're going to talk about that too, which are even outside still of the official scope of view of the Trust Fund for Victims. We have 4 speakers still to hear from, including from the screen. If we can get Sarah on the screen. Sarah, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Let me just briefly introduce you so that everybody has an understanding. Sarah published a book called Libya, No Escape from Hell. Sorry, it's a documentary, 60 minutes documentary, filmed in Libya on the entire detention system and the role of the militias. And she also made a documentary, The Ship That Stopped 7,000 Migrants and Smuggled 700,000 Cigarettes, for the New York Times, an investigation on an Italian warship that was deployed to Tripoli to help combat people smugglers. This is what it's about, people smugglers. And Sarah is also undertaking scholarly work, research on the intersection of technology, transitional justice, human rights law, and fundamental freedoms. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, and I would like to raise 2 important points here that I've encountered while reporting in Libya and other initial findings from my research. I want to also, make an important point when we talk about technology, and we need to remember that technology is not neutral, but inherited the biases of those who design it. And when applied to migration, especially in the context of Libya, these further harm marginalized group and community. I see that increasingly technological systems are strengthening those infrastructure of control even further. I can see that government and EU institutions, for example, in the context of Libya, are using predictive analysis and analytics to forecast migration trends, to facilitate pushbacks at border and other ways to prevent people from exercising their right to seek asylum. And this this has huge consequences on the way that this community express themselves online, and it has huge impact on the way this community understand the technology. We don't have to forget that asylum seekers and refugees that are trapped in detention center in Libya are rising risk of surveillance and deterrence system that are developed along the EU border. I can make you example that I've been investigating, and from drones that are being used at the border in the Mediterranean Sea to basically monitor refugees, watch refugees from there. In the context of Libya, also Frontex is using a surveillance tool made by Israeli armed companies. And so my call here is to explore the impact of this technology on refugees and migrants that are trapped in detention center, and that they are trying to reach Europe and reach safety. A second point that I want to raise is also about the need to conduct more in-depth investigation on how this commercially oriented algorithm operation impact our action and research and refugees' life, while government strategy to control dissident and refugees are becoming more sophisticated or are just exploiting algorithm and platform vulnerability. We need to conduct more research to understand how these algorithms are also affecting our action. In this sense, for example, I experience coordinated inattentive behavior or shadow banning or other challenges that refugees and asylum seekers have been facing while trying to reach journalists, activists, and community in seek for help. This is all a system and a media infrastructure that is governed by algorithm, and it's not context blind, and also may reflect platform bias as well as state pressure. In the sense, I would like also here to reflect on the fact that the new Meta policy, and in particular the violent and graphic content policy of Meta at Facebook, state that they remove any content that glorify or celebrate suffering, but they allow graphic content to help people raise awareness. So in terms of this policy, this prohibits the posting of video of people that, for example, may face dead bodies or, depict violence, but allow content that may be newsworthy. In this sense, the refugees and the asylum seeker or activists I spoke with that have been working to collect evidences of mass grave or other violation that were committed, they highlighted this case, and they highlighted how platforms have been deleting their content, and they emphasize the need and the importance of allowing this user to continue documenting this human rights violation explicitly when internet may be the only way for them to reach other activists or journalists. And especially I wanted to mention here a recent communication that I had with the Facebook Oversight Board in terms of the need to make sure that this documentation that is constantly a threat to be deleted need to be verified and need to be staying on platform to continue archiving and verification. So when we look at our database, we see that more often we need to rely on video that are posted on platforms. And if these video are being removed from the platform because they are not complying with platform regulation or terms of reference, we see that we may lose specific content that we may need for our investigation. So I think it's important here to also discuss how this commercially oriented algorithms are impacting our action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for your very thoughtful intervention on how technology, even if it is used, must not be assumed to be neutral, and how algorithms may actually work against the cause of, and the interest actually of victims or those who are subject to human rights violations. And the awareness that we need as consumers of the digital world, that this is actually coming to you as well, or not coming to you, because of the lack of neutrality of the digital world and algorithms. And I just like to recall what Christina said, when they set up the gateway in Bangui, there were fears also that this would actually work against the purpose that was there in place. So that mindfulness really needs to be there at all stages. So thank you so much, Sarah. I'd like to go to Clara, please, who works at Tilburg University as a PhD candidate on the topic of human rights violations that occur in the context of forced movement along the central Mediterranean route, and particularly looking at the aspects of digitalization in the nexus of environmental, political, and social problems. Please, Clara, the floor is yours.
Thanks, everyone. I'm really happy to be able to speak today about this topic, and what I really want to start with. So, the people that I've interviewed for my research, working together also with my colleague Morgan, who we will hear from later. I want to emphasize that the people that I interviewed, they move from the Horn of Africa towards Libya, and on these routes, it's not only the fact that they don't have connectivity, like we're talking about. It's not just a black hole that is there in the infrastructure. It's actually a black hole that in many ways is created by it's purposefully created because people understand the power that technology has. We assume that we are living in a world where people will have access to information, and also the access to information has created a speed to information. So information is fast and it's always there. If you're not in the news in one moment, you will not be in the news the next, because there's always something happening. So in that context, it ends up that digital technology is really purposefully used to control people. And that is really what I'm looking at in my interview. And then if I start with, for example, the situations of the refugee camps in Sudan, where many of the human trafficking journeys that I'm looking at towards Libya start, people are really sort of pushed and pulled by this technology. If you look at the refugees from Tigray that are now in the refugee camps in Sudan, often they will want to stay as close as possible to the border, just so that they may have some news coming in, they may have some information. So people are really hungry for that type of information, and then indeed they have their phones, they hold on to their phones. But as soon as they start their journey to Libya, most of them don't even bother taking their phones, because why? They know it will be taken from them. Almost without fail. If they bring it, they lose it. And so how is it possible that human trafficking still has such a strong digital input? What happens is that when those people who have lost their phones arrive in Libya, they are actually extorted by the use of mobile phones, not their mobile phones, but the mobile phones in this case of the human traffickers. And what they do is that they make the refugees call their family members or send them videos or sound recordings of the refugees being tortured. And the family members or friends or communities are then pressured into paying very high ransoms for the lives of the people. So it creates this really strong situation where on the one hand people rely on technology, are pulled by technology, and on the other hand they, through the purposeful denial of connectivity, they become victims of black hole crimes. They become victims of very severe torture. They are forced to spread their information. So instead of them volunteering to spread information, now their force is used against them. And often that is the only thing their family members can hear from them in a really long time. So imagine being a family member, having no connection with your relative, and then suddenly the first thing you hear, they are in Libya and now they're being tortured. So this creates a situation where what do you do with technology in that context? It's not always positive. but it's not completely negative either. It's just created a new system of human trafficking that didn't exist before because of the possibilities it now offers, new possibilities that weren't there earlier. So I think this aspect is not yet enough taken into account in these situations, because if rather than having a human trafficking situation that goes from A to B and you have exploitation in B, it is now created an A, B, C. A where there is a start, B where there's exploitation, and then C is where people end up going to. But oftentimes when people end up in places where they're going to, the exploitation they have suffered in that sort of remote digital way is not taken into account. And that creates, I think, a very difficult position for prosecution of such crimes, because it allows people to almost call in remotely, to almost direct it remotely, and have a very international aspect to them. So even if you have countries like Libya, which are still relatively well connected, still there are black holes, still there, and that is then purposeful. And that also hides the perpetrators in a sense. I think I want to leave it at that intervention because I really want to hear from Morgan also. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you for your intervention, showing us how to weaponize digital media in a black hole kind of environment and actually create more harm than is already there. I think it's a very important insight to have had in this meeting. I'd like to go to Morgan, please, for the next intervention. Morgan is a research student at the Tilburg University and published on human trafficking, again in the Central Mediterranean area, together, I think, with Clara. And you're a freelance journalist focusing on human rights abuses, and you're based in Tunisia. Sorry. She works for Le Point Afrique, Intifada, and Hans Lucas. And you're a documentary film worker, so we're really looking forward to hear from your perspective.
Thank you very much. I would like to take this opportunity to highlight the fact that criminalization is not a solution, and often criminalization puts people in the darkness when we need to bring up light. So to illustrate that point, I will use the voice of smugglers. So I was living in Agadez before. It's in Niger, and it's the last stopover before crossing the Sahara. So a lot of smugglers are living there, and it was a very legal and normal activity before to bring people, migrants from everywhere, towards Libya. And it was made in a legal way. Everybody was living together on a convoy. Every Monday, we live together towards Libya. It takes 5 days. But then new laws were brought to criminalize migration because Libya is a dangerous country and people can come later to cross the Mediterranean Sea, which is dangerous too. So now smugglers, when you ask them where does human trafficking comes from, they answer, yes, but because we have no longer the right to take migrants in the convoy, so we take longer roads. And then we have more accidents. And maybe people die on the road. Maybe if something happened with the car, we cannot ask for help. If bandits come, we cannot deal with them. So people start to die more and more in the Sahara. So the migrants, they don't trust the smuggler anymore. So they say, I will not pay you before leaving. I will pay you once I arrive in Libya. And then the smuggler say, okay, I will bring you together with me to Sabha, for instance, in Libya. And then in Sabha, the smuggler says, wait, where is my money? And the migrant says, I just have to call my friend. He will send the money in 3 days. Then the smuggler says, I cannot wait. Then he starts beating the migrants. And this is one of the ways human trafficking for ransom started to increase in Libya. So there are a lot of others explanation to that phenomenon. But I think that by making something that was illegal, we break the connection that people like migrants and refugees can have if they need to ask for help. They need to call NGOs or journalists, like Sarah Freta was explaining. So this is just what I wanted to present.
Thank you so much, Morgan, for sharing your perspective of this problem. And I think we have the final speaker on the screen. I hope, Natalia, we put her on the screen, please. And while this is happening, Natalia is a research student indeed at the Tilburg University on the Central Mediterranean route of human trafficking. And she's also working, doing research in relation to Ukraine. Natalia, please, you have the floor.
Hello, can you hear me? It's very nice to be here today, also online. So yeah, I'm a researcher at Tilburg University, and as a Ukrainian student in the Netherlands, I've been following closely the situation in my home country. My research right now is basically centered around the war in Ukraine. So I have noticed a few developments. First of all, we are all in the West used to think that the media attention that Ukrainian cases are getting worldwide are very powerful and very evident. However, what is going on in the Ukrainian media sphere and the Ukrainian internet versus what gets translated and what reaches the Western media sphere is just two huge differences, and they're incomparable. Because as a Ukrainian speaker, you get, and also as a Ukrainian social media user, you get kind of a fuller picture disruptions with the internet, but also with, for instance, whenever people would hide in bomb shelters, they don't have internet, but they also don't have enough electricity to sustain their devices to report on what is going on. So in the first weeks, especially of war, and in the places like Mariupol, there were a lot of screenshots being shared from messages from family members that were hiding in bomb shelters and in their homes, in basements, with the content like, yes, I'm right now, I don't have internet, I don't know when I will have it, but I just send this message, so whenever I have like a glimpse of connection, you will get it. We are afraid, we are terrified, we have no food, no water, no safety, we don't know what's going to happen. And because there was not enough connection with these people, the screenshots were taken around the internet, the Ukrainian internet. Sometimes they were translated into English. And actually, the further into the war, the more of such content is actually being professionally translated and distributed into English, so that there is some coverage for the victims. However, we all hear about Mariupol, we all hear about Bucha, about Irpin, about this terrible instances. There are more of those. So these are very terrible, but a lot of territory is being occupied and it gets kind of less media attention, although people are still suffering and the war is not over. And now we, of course, see also like a huge dip in the media coverage because it's been almost 4 months. So the stories, they are kind of yeah, they're horrible, but they keep on repeating themselves about rape of children, of women, of men, of elderly, about torture, about looting, about destroying cultural heritage, about destroying important key infrastructures, just terrible things. Another kind of strategy, media strategy employed by Ukrainian security service are the intercepts of the calls of Russian soldiers with their families in Russia. So there is a lot about the Ukrainian perspective on the war, and also Ukrainian soldiers, of course, the things they go through. But these calls published online, they kind of show the other side of the story. And this is also a very negative side of the story. So a lot of soldiers are calling their families, and they, for instance, talk about how they torture Ukrainians, or how they loot their homes, and you can hear the conversations. And because in Ukraine there are also a lot of Russian speakers, you understand the emotional load, you understand the content, you can relate really well to all this information. So that is also one of the kind of strategies to make it a bigger media event still. Also, some of these conversations were translated into English so that they're more clear for international audiences. It's been 4 months, and a lot of the information kind of gets overlapped. A lot does not reach the media users anymore. There are still disruptions in many places, and thankfully there was some media attention, but of course it's still not enough, and more research and more media and more energy should be directed into kind of uncovering these crimes, war crimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia, for bringing your perspective on a reverse situation in which you have a massive digital footprint, but you have blind spots and you have filters which are distorting the picture, distorting the information, and making it not easier to understand what is happening. So we come to the end of the speakers. I think we have about 10 minutes, I hope. Yes, I'm getting 5 minutes. I'm taking 10 minutes. Negotiating. I would like to hear from the audience, or maybe even from the first speakers, because you basically started the conversation. You've heard from the other speakers, whether there have been any thoughts that provoked your further thinking, and that you might like to share with us. But before going back to you, I'd like to hear if anybody else in the audience wants to share something, or wants to basically express how this is resonating with your understanding, or you have a different understanding of the problem of black holes. So don't hesitate to raise your hand, raise your voice, speak up. Dr. Helen, please come over here. I'd like to hear from you.
Thank you again. But I'd like to express the things that I wanted to say, and I wrote them down. If you don't mind, I will read them to you. So, as I told you, I'm a Dr. Helen, and I'm a physician, and I was in Aksum University as a lecturer and a GP when the war in Tilburg happened. So I'll just show you how things happened and how my experiences were in that situation. So I would like to begin my speech with my favorite quote that has resonated with me since childhood. That is, ignorance is the curse of God, and knowledge is the wing where we fly together. And this was from the legend William Shakespeare. So I planned and made lists of things to do over like the past 10 years, and made my dream of being a doctor a reality. And then I planned again, to advance my career. And I worked in different areas in Tigray, Aksum, Shura, a lot of places. And then November 2020, the war in Tigray happened. So as I told you, I was working. So my carefully planned specialty was thrown, of course. So I realized then that planning is valuable, but I learned firsthand from experience that plans can easily dissolve in situations that are beyond our control. And I've also learned that perseverance and flexibility is important when these kind of situations happen. So, I'm surprised that I'm here today, and I wanted to share this experience, this unfortunate and dire situation that is happening in Tigray, because this kind of crisis can change people's lives and make them stuck and hopeless in every situation. So I want everyone to think and picture yourselves when I ask these questions. So have you ever had a connection issues like internet or network? You can raise your hands. And it's really irritating, yeah. What would you do if you were denied to access your bank savings and you don't have anything to feed your children? Not having water, not having electricity, not having transport, not having aid, and not having fuel, losing loved ones, destruction of properties. Simply put, you can imagine being left with nothing in a matter of days or seconds. Can you imagine living like this for the past 596 days? 596 days as of today. And this is how life is in Tigray. And no human being should turn a blind eye to that. So what can be done? That is the major question. I'm here today because I feel like people are dying every day and nobody is trying to do something. I know it takes energy and I know it takes a lot of work, but we are all human and we have to care enough to do the work. We have to. Nobody is willing to do anything, and 6 million people are under siege. And it has been happening for 596 days. What should we do to create the awareness? What should we do to help people? It's a serious situation. I can't tell you how traumatizing the experiences I've seen. And we have to do something. And I know people who are watching from a distance, but we have to give hope and build some kind of solution that will make a difference to this community. I believe that out of evil there can come good, and out of this we will have cynical young people, or we can create youth that have an opportunity to look forward or past this trauma. So I believe that we have to address this situation by providing education or some kind of means, by creating connection with them. So because it's really important, being stuck there for this amount of time and having to process all this trauma and having not having any kind of means to access anything is very troubling. So I hope every one of you here to feel what is happening in Tigray. I hope I know it takes energy. I know like it's traumatizing. I know everyone does not want to think about it, but it's really happening. It really is. People are dying. People are suffering. So I want every one of you to think about this, and I want every one of you to be in that place and to just feel the pain of others. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Helen, thank you for standing here, sharing your story. Thank you for your courage and perseverance to come here. In a few minutes, at the end of this meeting, you made it real. And I think that's what it's about. Everybody is touched in this audience. I think everybody watching this video will feel that this is the reality that we're talking about. And I cannot find any other way of closing today, this session. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for being with us, for sharing your insights and your stories. This is not only about the black hole, the internet, it's about the black hole, period. That we need to be reminded, even if we don't all want to think about it all the time, we can't afford to forget about that. We need to be aware and to engage together with you, Helen, together with everybody who is there. Thank you so much.
Well, I want to really thank you, Peter,